The star chart was old. Not in the way that made it useless, but in the way that made it feel like it had seen too much. The edges were worn from years of handling, and the projection nodes at its corners had been replaced 3 times. Sovan had used it for longer than most of his junior staff had been alive, and he knew every line on it the way a person knows the walls of their own home. That was why the blank zone bothered him. He had looked at that chart 1,000 times, maybe more. And somehow, in all those years, the blank region near the galactic mid-arm had simply existed in the background of his attention, never demanding anything from him. It was labeled in small, plain text. Human space. No subregions, no listed worlds, no patrol lanes or trade routes marked inside it. Just a wide, quiet nothing. Bordered by a thin, neutral line that separated it from the rest of the known galaxy. Sovan stood in his private study on the upper floor of the Conclave's main tower and stared at it. His aide, a young Vethrani named Essil, came in with a data tablet and stopped when he saw the old chart activated on the table. "Is something wrong?" Essil asked. "Come here," Sovan said. "Look at this region. What do you know about it?" Essil stepped closer and looked at the blank zone. He was quiet for a moment. "It is human territory," he said. "They claimed it a long time ago." "What is inside it?" Essil paused again. "I am not sure. I have never seen a detailed map of it." "Neither have I," Sovan said. "And I have been working with star charts for 40 years. Essil did not say anything to that. There was a small shift in his posture. Something careful, and Sovan noticed it immediately. Essil was not confused. He was being cautious. That was a different thing entirely. "Find me whatever the open archives have on the interior of human space," Sovan said. "Of course," Essil said, and left quickly. Sovan turned back to the chart. The blank zone was not small. It covered a wide stretch of territory, larger than most coalition holdings, larger than the Palathi expansion zones, larger than anything the Garathi had ever claimed at their peak. And yet there was nothing inside it on any map he had ever seen. No data, no surveys, no trade nodes, nothing. He had simply never thought to question it before. That evening, Sovan attended a trade briefing in the Conclave's lower chambers. It was a routine session, cargo lane adjustments, to a minor dispute over fuel depot rights near the Kulhari border, the usual back and forth between parties who all wanted more than they were willing to give. Sovan sat near the end of the table and waited for the right moment. When the session opened for general comments, he raised the matter of the blank zone. He asked simply whether the Conclave had any updated survey data for the interior of human space, and whether it might be time to formally request that humans submit a standard territorial disclosure, filing the way every other member was required to. The room changed. It was not loud. No one shouted or made a scene. But the energy shifted the way it does when someone says something that lands wrong. A few of the senior members looked down at their tablets. One cleared his throat. The Conclave chair, a broad-shouldered Kulhari female named Dressa, moved the session forward without acknowledging the question at all. After the briefing, as people were leaving, a Palathi delegate named Oren touched Sovan's arm and leaned close. "Do not push that topic in open session," Oren said quietly. "Why not?" Sovan asked. Oren looked at him for a moment. "Because no one is going to answer you, and you will only draw attention to yourself." He walked away before Sovan could respond. Sovan stood in the emptying room and thought about that. The next morning, Essil returned with a data report. It was thin. The open archives had very little on human space. A few old boundary declarations, a short history of the region's original claim filing, and a general note that internal surveys were classified under human sovereign privacy rights. That provision existed in Conclave law, but almost no one used it. Most species were eager to share their territorial data because it established their standing and their holdings. The humans had filed for privacy protection on their entire internal region and never updated it. Sauvin read the report twice. Then he went to find the human liaison. Cole Harding was in one of the smaller meeting rooms near the conclave's east wing, sitting at a table with a cup of something hot and a thin stack of papers. He was a human male, somewhere in his middle years, with an easy way of carrying himself that Sauvin had always found slightly confusing. Most diplomats had a performance to them. Cole seemed to have none. He looked up when Sauvin entered and smiled the way someone smiles when they are genuinely glad to see you. "Sauvin," he said. "Oh, sit down. Do you want anything?" "I want to ask you something," Sauvin said, sitting down across from him. "Sure," Cole said. "The blank zone on the star chart. Human space. I have been trying to find any detailed information about what is inside it, and I cannot find anything. The archives have almost nothing. The conclave members I ask either change the subject or tell me to leave it alone." Sauvin looked at him steadily. "Why?" Cole held his cup with both hands and looked at Sauvin for a moment. There was nothing defensive in his expression. He did not look uncomfortable. He looked, if anything, mildly entertained. "It is just how we like it," he said. "That is not an answer," Sauvin said. "It is a true one," Cole said, still calm. Sauvin leaned forward slightly. "Or every other member of this conclave has submitted territorial surveys. Every other member has trade data, colony registrations, population estimates on file. You have a blank zone the size of a small coalition and a privacy notice that has not been updated in decades. The other members clearly know something about this that I do not, because they will not discuss it. I am asking you directly." Cole nodded slowly. He looked down at his cup, then back up at Sauvin. "I appreciate that you are asking me directly," he said. "That is more than most people do." "Then tell me something." Cole smiled again. It was a quiet smile, not unkind, but it did not open anything. "What I can tell you is that we are not hiding anything that threatens the conclave. What goes on inside our territory is our business, and we keep it that way by design. The privacy filing is legal. The blank zone is ours." He paused. "And the fact that your colleagues get quiet when you ask about it should probably tell you something." "It tells me they are afraid," Sauvin said. Cole did not confirm or deny that. He just picked up his cup again and looked at the window. Sauvin left the meeting feeling no better informed than before, but that was not entirely true. He had learned one thing. Cole Harding, a man who smiled easily and spoke plainly, had been given a question he clearly knew the full answer to, and he had given almost nothing back. Not from rudeness, not from confusion, from practice. It was the kind of answer a person gives when they have been trained to give it. That night, Sauvin went back to his study and stood in front of the old star chart again. And the blank zone sat where it always had, quiet and featureless, bordered by that thin, neutral line. He looked at it for a long time. It was not empty. He was certain of that now. He did not know what was inside it. But something was. Something that made senior conclave members go still and change the subject. Something that made even careful diplomats like Orun speak in low voices, and something that made Cole Harding smile like a man who already knew how the story ended. The rumors started small, the way they always do. A junior clerk in the conclave's records division mentioned to a friend that Sauvin had been pulling archive files on human space. The friend mentioned it to someone else. Within 3 days, it had reached the ears of half the delegation heads, filtered through the kind of quiet, a sidelong communication that busy political buildings run on. Everyone knew. And the fact that everyone knew and no one said anything openly was itself a kind of answer. Sauvin watched it happen. He was good at watching. 40 years of diplomacy had made him skilled at reading the space between words, the pause before an answer, the way a person's hands changed when a topic made them uncomfortable. He watched his colleagues carefully in the days that followed his question to Cole, and what he saw was not contempt for the question. It was not dismissal. It was something quieter and more interesting. It was the careful behavior of people who had already learned not to look too closely. He had lunch with Dressa on the fourth day. She was the conclave chair, Kulhari by species, and she had been in this building longer than almost anyone. And she was sharp and direct, and not given to small talk. Sovan liked her for that reason. "You are still thinking about it," she said, before he could raise the subject. "You could tell?" he said. "You have the same expression you had when you were working out the Palathi trade dispute 3 years ago," she said. "Like you have found a loose thread and you are deciding whether to pull it." "Should I pull it?" he asked. Dressa looked at him across the table. "I will tell you this much," she said. "What you are looking at is old. Whatever arrangement exists between the conclave and human space, it goes back further than either of us has been here. The older species know more. The ones who were present during the early claim period." She paused. "I asked questions myself when I was younger. Not as many as you are asking, but some." "What did you find?" Sovan asked. "I found that the people who knew the most were the most unwilling to share it," she said, "and that the ones who had pushed hardest for answers in the past were no longer around to talk about it." She said it plainly, without drama, the way she said most things. "I am not saying something happened to them. I am saying they retired or moved on or simply stopped bringing it up." She picked up her drink. "I chose a long career." It was the most honest thing anyone had said to him on the subject. He thanked her, and she nodded, and neither of them spoke of it again at lunch. Cole Harding continued to show up to every session. He was always on time, always prepared, always carrying a calm that Sovan now paid close attention to. It was not the calm of someone who had nothing to hide. It was the calm of someone who had hidden something for so long that the hiding had become natural. Cole moved through the conclave like a man who understood exactly where he stood, even if no one else did. His aide, Nora Vance, was the same way. She was a young human female, quiet and efficient, and she had a habit of noticing things before they were pointed out to her. When a translation dispute broke out during a session, and 3 senior delegates began talking over each other, Nora had the correct documentation on the table before anyone had formally asked for it. Sovan watched her sometimes and thought that she and Cole shared the same quality, a particular kind of readiness, like people who had been told to always be prepared and had taken that instruction seriously. The probe incident happened on the 8th day after Sovan had first asked his question. A junior research team from the Palathi Coalition had been conducting a standard deep-range mapping project in the outer mid-arm region. They had sent a probe toward the blank zone, which was not unusual. Mapping teams sent probes in all directions. The probe had crossed the general threshold of human space and continued for approximately 6 minutes. Then it had stopped transmitting. There was no explosion on record. No signal burst, no distress frequency, no final data packet. It simply went from transmitting to not transmitting as cleanly as a switch being turned off. The Palathi research coordinator filed a quiet report with the Conclave's technical division. She noted that equipment failure was possible but unlikely, given the probe's age and maintenance record. She did not speculate further. The report was filed and did not appear in any of the general briefing summaries. Sovan found it because he was looking. He read it twice in his study, then sat back in his chair and thought. The probe had not been shot down, at least not in any way that left a detectable trace. It had not drifted off course. It had entered a zone and stopped working. There were a few ways to achieve that. All of them required significant technical ability. All of them required that someone on the other side was watching and responding. The blank zone was not unguarded. It was not empty. It was being monitored, and whatever was monitoring it was good enough to neutralize a probe without leaving any evidence of how. He brought this to Cole the next morning. Cole was in the break room near the east wing at the same table as before, with the same easy posture. Sovan sat down and placed the Palathi research report on the table between them. Cole glanced at it, then looked up. Palathi probe went silent near your border, Sovan said. No recorded cause. Equipment fails sometimes, Cole said. At exactly the moment it crosses your threshold? Unlucky timing, Cole said. His tone was light, but his eyes were steady. Cole, Sovan said. I have been a diplomat for a long time. I know when I am being managed. Cole was quiet for a moment. He looked at the report. Then he looked at Sovan with something that was not quite apology and not quite acknowledgement, but lived somewhere between the two. You are not being managed, he said. You are being given as much as I am allowed to give, which I understand is frustrating. He folded his hands on the table. What I can tell you is that the probe is fine. It is sitting somewhere safe. It will be returned. Sovan stared at him. You can return it? A request through the right channel would see it back inside a week, Cole said simply. Sovan sat with that for a moment. The probe was fine. Someone had taken it, not destroyed it. And Cole knew about it the way you know about something that happened in your own house. He could request its return through a channel. There was a channel. There was a process. And Cole was sitting here in a break room talking about it the way someone talks about a package held at a delivery office. How many people are in there? Sovan asked quietly. In the blank zone. Cole picked up his cup. Quite a few, he said. How many ships? Cole smiled, just slightly. He did not answer. Sovan went back to his study that evening and stood in front of the star chart for a long time. The blank zone was the same as it had always been, the same featureless quiet, the same thin border. But it felt different now. The way a locked door feels different once you understand that someone is standing on the other side of it. The galaxy had spent years looking at that blank space and deciding it was nothing. Sovan was starting to think that was exactly what someone had wanted. The Garathi had a reputation for doing things no one else was willing to do. They were not the strongest species in the conclave, nor the most advanced. But they had a particular kind of boldness that sometimes looked like courage and sometimes looked like a complete failure to understand consequences. Their privateer fleets operated in gray zones the conclave preferred not to examine too closely. They raided supply lanes, taxed independent traders, and occasionally moved through regions they had no legal right to enter. The conclave tolerated it because pushing the Garathi too hard created more problems than it solved. Their fleet captain was a male named Voruk, broad and scarred with a long record of successful operations in disputed space. He had 11 ships under his command. Not a war fleet, but more than enough to handle anything a quiet stretch of unclaimed territory might produce. And when one of his scouts reported that the blank zone on the human border had no patrol signatures, no sensor buoys, and no recorded defensive activity of any kind, Voruk decided it was exactly the kind of place a man in his line of work needed. He told his fleet they were setting up a base. They crossed the threshold on a clear morning, in tight formation, running quiet. Voruk had done this kind of thing before. Enter fast, move to the interior, find somewhere to anchor, and be established before anyone noticed. The blank zone was wide enough to disappear into. He expected nothing on the other side of that thin borderline except open space and time to work. What he got was silence. But it was a different kind of silence than empty space. For the first 2 hours, nothing happened. The ships moved inward, sensors running. Amun found nothing. No stations, no signals, no signs of life. Voruk felt the quiet confidence that came with a plan going smoothly. He told his navigators to begin scanning for suitable anchor points. On the 3rd hour, the comms picked up a single transmission. It was clear, unhurried, and in perfect Garathi dialect. It said, You have entered sovereign human space without authorization. You are advised to stop and hold your current position. Voruk looked at his communications officer. The officer looked back at him. Neither of them knew when humans had learned to speak Gorathi. Voruk responded. He identified his fleet as independent traders conducting a survey and said they would be happy to file the appropriate paperwork through the conclave. It was the standard line. It had worked before in other places. And the response came back within 30 seconds. It said, "We know who you are. Hold position." Voruk did not hold position. He ordered the fleet to continue moving inward, and he increased speed. If there were humans out here, they were few, and his 11 ships were enough. What happened next happened fast. The sensors did not pick up the incoming ships until they were already in close range. They appeared on the screen all at once, as if they had simply chosen to become visible. Voruk counted 6 of them before he stopped counting, because the number kept increasing. They were large. Larger than anything he had expected to encounter this far from any known shipyard. They moved in a formation so clean and coordinated it looked less like a fleet response and more like a single organism choosing to close around something. No weapons were fired. Not one shot. The human ships simply surrounded his fleet and held there, and the silence that followed was so complete that Voruk could hear the hum of his own ship's systems. A second transmission came. This one was direct to his personal channel, and it was in plain trade. Common, calm, and flat. It said, "Captain Voruk, your fleet will not be harmed. You will be escorted back to the boundary. One of your ships will be permitted to continue to conclave space as a courtesy. The remaining 10 will stay here until a formal diplomatic inquiry is received. This is not a negotiation. You have 30 seconds to confirm." Voruk sat in his command chair and looked at the ships surrounding him on the screen. He had been in tight situations before. He knew the difference between an opponent who was showing force and an opponent who was using force. The humans were doing the first. They were not angry. They were not excited. They were calm in a way that was more frightening than anger because it meant they had done this before and it had never required them to raise their voice. He confirmed. His ship was escorted back to the boundary. The other 10 stayed. The escorts that brought him back to conclave space said nothing else during the journey. When they reached the threshold, they peeled off and disappeared back into the blank zone without ceremony. Voruk arrived at the nearest conclave station 3 days later and requested an emergency session. He would only speak in a closed room. He would not speak if the human liaison was present. The conclave agreed to both conditions. In that room, he told them everything. He did not embellish. He did not try to make himself sound braver than he had been. He described the ships, their number, their size, their positioning. He described the transmissions, the calm, the speed with which they had appeared. He described the 30-second deadline and how he had not for one moment believed they were bluffing. He said, "They were not trying to scare us. They were informing us. There is a difference, and I have spent my whole life in dangerous places, and I know it when I see it." When he finished, the room was quiet for a long time. Dressa asked him if he had seen anything of the interior, any stations, any worlds, any indication of what lay deeper inside the blank zone beyond the ships. Voruk shook his head. "They came to us," he said. "Or we never got close enough to see anything. And I think that was the point. They could have shown us more and they chose not to. What they let us see was exactly enough." He paused. "And what they let me bring back was a message." "What message?" someone asked. "That they could have kept all 11 ships and no one could have done anything about it," he said. "But they sent me back. They knew that was worse. A captain with a story is worth more than 11 missing ships." No one argued with that. Down the hall from the closed session room, in the small break area near the east wing, Cole Harding sat at his usual table with a cup of coffee and a data reader. Nora Vance was sitting across from him, going through a stack of scheduling notes. They were not talking, and they looked like two people at the end of a quiet workday with nothing particular on their minds. When a conclave aide passed and mentioned that the closed session had ended, Cole nodded politely and went back to his reading. Nora said nothing at all. Sovan found him there an hour later. He sat down without being invited and looked at Cole for a long moment. Cole looked back at him. He did not ask what Sovan wanted. 10 ships, Sovan said. I heard the session ran long, Cole said. 10 ships, Cole, sitting inside your border, and you can make one call and have them back. Cole turned a page on his reader. When should I expect the formal inquiry? He asked. Sovan did not answer that. He sat in the chair across from this calm, smiling man and thought about the blank zone on the map, and the ships that had appeared out of nothing, and the captain who had come back alone with shaking hands and honest eyes. He thought about how the conclave had always treated humans like a small, quiet footnote, a species that filed its privacy forms and showed up to sessions and never made trouble. He was beginning to understand that someone had worked very hard to make it look that way. The wormhole gate at Junction Point 7 had been unstable for months. The engineering teams had flagged it twice, filed the maintenance requests through the proper channels, and been told that the repair schedule was backed up. Junction Point 7 was a secondary route, not a primary one. The traffic that used it was mostly independent civilian convoys, moving goods between the outer territories and the mid-arm trade hubs. It was not glamorous infrastructure. It did not get priority attention. And so when it collapsed badly. The gate sheared on both ends simultaneously, which was the worst possible failure mode. The resulting gravitational disturbance pushed a convoy of 14 civilian transport vessels off their lane and into a radiation corridor between two dense stellar clusters. The corridor was not survivable for long. The radiation levels would begin affecting crew and passengers within hours and reach lethal concentrations well before any standard rescue fleet could make the journey from the nearest conclave military station. The emergency chair of the conclave, a Palatha senior named Urath, received the distress signal at the same time as everyone else. He immediately began calculating response options. And the nearest fleet was 8 hours away at full speed. The corridor offered maybe 5 hours of survivable conditions, depending on ship shielding. There were over 900 civilians in that convoy. Families, traders, a school group making a cultural tour of the outer territories. Urath ran the numbers 4 times. They came out the same every time. He looked at the blank zone on his star chart. It sat there on the map the way it always had, quiet and featureless. But he knew now what Sovan knew and what the rest of the conclave had quietly absorbed over the past weeks. He knew about the ships that had surrounded Vorok's fleet in minutes. He knew about the probe sitting safe on the other side of the border. He knew about the transmissions in perfect Garathi dialect and the 30-second deadlines. Inan Cole Harding sitting in the break room like a man who had already read the last page of the book. He pulled up the human liaison's contact line. Cole answered on the second tone. Urath did not waste time. He laid out the situation plainly. The convoy, the corridor, the timeline, the distance. He said he was formally requesting assistance under the conclave's emergency provision, which allowed any member to appeal directly to another for urgent aid. Cole listened without interrupting. When Urath finished, there was a short silence on the line. Then Cole said, "I will make a call." He said it the same way someone says they will pass a message along, easy and simple, like the size of what was being asked was not a concern. Urath said, "How long?" Cole said, "Check your sensors in about 40 minutes. The line closed. Urath sat in his chair and stared at the ceiling for a moment. Then he told his staff to watch the sensor arrays and report anything that came in from the direction of human space. 38 minutes later, One of his technicians stood up from her station with an expression on her face that Urath had never seen there before. "Sir," she said, "I am reading warp signatures." "How many?" he asked. She looked at her screen. She looked again. "I am still counting," she said. The signatures came out of the blank zone in sequence, one after another, emerging from the human border at intervals so precise they looked like they were being timed. Urath watched the screen. His staff watched the screen. The room went completely quiet. The ships were large. They were larger than anything the Conclave's outer patrol fleets operated. And they moved with a smoothness that made other fleets look like they were still learning. There were 43 of them by the time the count settled. They arranged themselves into a formation that Urath did not recognize. Not an attack posture, not a standard escort formation. Something else. Something that looked designed specifically for the task at hand. They moved toward the radiation corridor at a speed that Urath's navigation officer said was not possible with standard drives. The officer then quietly revised that assessment. The lead vessel opened a channel to the convoy. A human female voice came through, steady and professional. She identified herself as Admiral Diana Rowe and told the convoy to hold position and prepare for external shielding support. She said her fleet would have them clear of the corridor within 90 minutes. She said it the way you say something you have done before. The convoy captain, a badly shaken man named Felix Orr, came back on the channel and asked who he was talking to and where they had come from. Diana Rowe said, "We were close." The rescue took 84 minutes. The human ships deployed shielding arrays around the civilian transports, absorbed the radiation load, and pulled the convoy through the corridor with a coordination that left Urath's staff in silence. At one point, 2 human vessels repositioned simultaneously to brace against a radiation surge that the convoy's own instruments had not yet detected. They had seen it coming before anyone else knew it was there. When the convoy cleared the corridor, the Diana Rowe's voice came back on the main conclave channel. She was brief. She said the convoy was safe and that she was returning her fleet to their operating area. She said the conclave was welcome to file a formal acknowledgement if it chose to. She said she hoped the gate repair schedule would be updated. Then the channel closed. 43 ships turned and moved back toward the blank zone. They did not rush. They moved at a pace that felt, to Sovan, who was watching the sensor feed from his study, almost deliberate. Like they were allowing the galaxy a long enough look to understand what it was seeing. The ships crossed the threshold and disappeared back into the blank zone, and the sensor arrays showed nothing. Sovan stood in front of his star chart and stared at the space where they had been. That he had watched the whole thing from his study. He had not said a word. He had just stood there and watched 43 ships come out of nothing, save 900 lives with the calm efficiency of people performing a routine task, and then go back into nothing like they had just stepped out for a moment. In the conclave's main chamber, Urath was on his feet, and no one was talking over anyone else. The room was very still. Dressa looked at the blank zone on the main display for a long time. Then she said quietly, "How many more of them are in there?" No one answered. Cole Harding was standing in the doorway of the chamber. Sovan did not know when he had come in. Cole was not smiling this time. He was just watching the room with that steady, open expression of his, the one that gave nothing away and somehow gave everything away at the same time. Sovan walked over to him. 43 ships, Sovan said. And that was not everything. No, Cole said. That was not close to everything. Cole looked at the display where the blank zone sat unchanged and featureless on the map. "We sent what was needed," he said. "We did not send more." Sovan stood beside him and looked at the same display. "You have been waiting for us to ask," he said. It was not a question. Cole was quiet for a moment. "We have been waiting for the right time," he said. "And now?" Sovan asked. Cole turned from the display and looked at him. "Now I think it is time to have a real conversation," he said. I will make some introductions. The summit was held in the conclave's largest chamber, the one used for full membership sessions and major treaty events. Every delegation was present. The seats were full for the first time in years because word had moved fast after the corridor rescue, and no one wanted to be the member who missed what came next. Cole Harding did not take his usual seat at the side table. He sat briefly with his aide Nora Vance near the back and then stepped aside entirely when the human delegation entered. The delegation was small, 5 people. They walked in without ceremony, without a formal announcement, without any of the theater that most major delegations used to signal importance. They simply came in and took their seats, and the room noticed them anyway, because there was something in how they carried themselves that made the room notice. Not arrogance, not performance, but just the quiet confidence of people who did not need to prove anything and knew it. The man at the center of the group was named Grant Ellison. He was older, with silver at his temples and a face that had the kind of stillness that comes from spending a long time in rooms where the wrong word costs too much. He wore no insignia, no rank markers, no decorations. He set a single slim folder on the table in front of him and looked out at the chamber with the patience of someone who had been waiting a long time for this particular moment. Nora Vance sat 2 seats down from him. She had a data tablet and a calm expression. The other 3 members of the delegation were introduced by name only: a man named Carl Voss, a woman named Leah Strand, and a quiet figure named Paul Okafor, who said nothing at all during the session and seemed to be listening to things no one else could hear. Urath, as emergency chair, opened the session. He was formal about it, which Savan appreciated. The moment deserved formality. Grant Ellison spoke for about 10 minutes before anyone asked him anything. He did not read from the folder. He spoke the way someone speaks when the words have been carried in their head for a long time and have finally been given somewhere to go. He started with the war. Most of the room knew about it in the vague, distant way that people know about old history. An event from before living memory, referenced in archive texts, settled and done. What Grant told them was not the archive version. He told them the actual version. Humans had encountered a spacefaring civilization in their early expansion period, long before the Conclave had formally acknowledged them as a member species. The civilization had not been interested in diplomacy. They had moved through human colonies with systematic efficiency, and humanity had lost more than half of its settled population before the war turned. He said it plainly, without pity for himself or hatred for the enemy. He said it the way a doctor describes a scar, not to ask for sympathy, but to explain what had been there before. The war ended. Humans survived. And in the aftermath, the survivors made a decision that shaped everything that followed. They decided they would never be caught unprepared again. Grant paused and let that sit with the room for a moment. Then he continued. The blank zone was not a mystery. It was a project. It had taken generations to build, and it had been built deliberately, quietly, and behind a boundary that the Conclave's privacy laws had protected without anyone needing to understand why the protection was being invoked. Inside that boundary, humans had settled hundreds of worlds. They had built shipyards that operated on a scale that the Conclave's largest industrial members had not matched. They had developed technologies in isolation that had moved well past what the general galactic standard had produced in the same period. They had grown a civilization that no one outside had been watching because they had chosen not to be watched. The population of human space, Grant said, was larger than the combined population of the 6 largest Conclave member species. That was the sentence that changed the room. It did not land loudly. It landed the way large things land, with a deep, slow weight that takes a moment to settle fully. Savan watched the faces around the chamber and saw it happen in real time. The recalculation, the adjustment, 40 years of assumptions quietly rearranging themselves. Dressa asked the question that everyone in the room was sitting with. She asked, why had humans not told them sooner? Grant looked at her steadily. Because we needed to know what kind of galaxy we were living in before we showed ourselves fully, he said. We had seen what happened when a civilization was visible before it was ready. We did not want to be that civilization again. He folded his hands on the table. The conclave is overall what we hoped it would be, a body that tries to keep order. I saw a group of species that has more interest in trade and stability than in expansion and conflict. We have been watching it for a long time, and we are satisfied that it is honest about what it is. And now? Dressa asked. Now, we would like to be part of it properly, Grant said. Not as a footnote, not as a blank on a map, as a full member with full standing, full disclosure, and full responsibility. He opened the slim folder in front of him and placed a single document at the center of the table. We have prepared a territorial declaration, a population census, and a full survey of our infrastructure. It is complete. You are welcome to verify it. The document sat on the table. No one moved to take it for a moment. Then Dressa reached out and picked it up. She looked at the first page. Her expression did not change. Oh, but her eyes moved slowly, the way eyes move when they are reading something that is larger than expected. She turned to the second page, and the third. She set it down carefully and looked at Grant. This will take some time to process, she said. We are not in a hurry, he said. Sovan was sitting at the far end of the table, watching all of it. He looked at Cole Harding, who was still near the back of the chamber. Cole caught his eye and gave him a small nod. Not smug, not triumphant. Just a nod, like a man acknowledging that a long road had finally reached where it was going. Sovan looked back at Grant, who was answering a question from the Palathi delegation with the same unhurried clarity he had used for everything else. He thought about the blank zone on his old star chart, about how many times he had looked at it and seen nothing, about how the nothing had always been a choice, made by people who had earned the right to make it. He thought about 43 ships coming out of that blank zone and saving 900 lives without being asked twice. And he thought about how that was not a favor. It was an introduction. He thought about Voruk's 10 ships, sitting quietly inside the border, perfectly safe, held not as prisoners, but as a demonstration of the difference between what humans could do and what they chose to do. That was the real message. It had always been the real message. Not the size of the fleet, not the depth of the population, not the scale of the shipyards. The message was the restraint. But the message was that they had possessed all of this for a very long time and had not once used it to take anything. After the session ended and the chamber began to empty, Sovan walked over to Cole. You knew this day was coming, Sovan said. We hoped for it, Cole said. You could have done this at any point, Sovan said. You did not need our permission or our approval. You could have simply declared your standing and dared anyone to argue. Cole considered that. We could have, he said, but that is not how we wanted to enter the room. He glanced toward the front of the chamber where Grant was still speaking with Dressa and Urath. We wanted to walk in like this, with an invitation. Sovan was quiet for a moment. I was the one who started asking questions, he said. East, did you know that would happen eventually? Someone always does, Cole said. We just wait for the right one. Sovan looked at him. And was I the right one? Cole smiled, that same quiet smile from the first day, the one that had felt like it was keeping a secret. You were the one who asked me directly, he said, and you did not stop asking when everyone told you to. He picked up his bag from the chair beside him and headed toward the door. We have been in that blank zone for a very long time, Sovan, he said without turning around. It is good to finally come out. Sovan stood in the emptying chamber and looked at the main display, where the star chart of the known galaxy was still active. The blank zone sat where it always had, but it did not look the same anymore. It did not look empty. It did not look quiet. Or it looked like what it was, a door, and someone had just opened it from the inside.